This week on the Bearded Mindset Project, the dudes are going to talk about Gap in the Gain by Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy. This is our first show. Let me explain what we're all about. Myself and the dudes on this show are not experts on any of the topics we discuss. We are a bunch of guys that want to grow and learn how to be content and happy with who we are. All of us are starting at different places, and as we learn and share our experiences with you, we hope that you can relate to some piece of this. But before we continue, I need to explain what a bearded mindset is. It's a term that we created to represent the unique approach to personal success and growth, primarily aimed at men. And as crazy as this might sound, this mindset embodies characteristics commonly associated with a well groomed beard: resilience, patience, discipline, adaptability, wisdom, and distinction. A well maintained beard can boost one's self confidence and self image. Similarly, the bearded mindset seeks to instill confidence in individuals, helping them believe in their abilities and potential to achieve their goals. Through discussions with the dudes on this show, the Bearded Mindset Project aims to empower men with or without beards to embrace this mindset and unlock their full potential. With that said, let's bring in the dudes and get started. So does anybody want to start us off with a big introduction of what the gap in the gain, hit us at the top level and work us down from there?
Sure, I'll hit that up. So the gap in the gain is all about adjusting your mindset to be happy. You know, right towards the beginning of the book, they talk about what's his name? Benjamin Franklin?
Thomas Jefferson.
Thomas Jefferson. Thank you. Thomas Jefferson said about the pursuit of happiness, that happiness shouldn't be something that you're pursuing. It's just something that you have. And the gap in the gain is that mindset to help you develop that mindset to just be happy and not have to go find it. It's not something you go find. It's just something that you have based on your mindset.
And it's actually pretty simple too, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, the concept in the book, the overarching concept is very simple. JD, why don't you tell us about it?
Yeah, it's in it's the old saying, look at the glass half full. And that's what they're talking about, because so easily in life we can be looking to the next thing, always looking to the next thing. And even when we reach our goals, we're always looking for that next thing. All they're doing is saying, hey, that's awesome to have these goals and work towards them, but stop, and instead of measuring how far you are away from that next goal, see how far you've come from where you started. If you get, when you have $10, or you have $9, don't look at that. Oh, I got $1 to go to 10. I got 9 that I didn't have before. That's a pretty simple concept, but it's really just a paradigm shift in a way of looking at yourself and the world.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Chaz, John, do you guys have anything else to add to that?
Just from the first chapter, I remember Thomas Jefferson talking about how like that culture that it started in the United States is, like the pursuit of happiness has now become that pursuit of never ending, can't find the gratification that we're wanting everyday culture. And Hollywood is probably the biggest promoter of that.
Yeah, the never-ending, never reachable, attainable goal. Yeah, it's hard to get to.
The interesting thing that I thought, as it started out, as it talks about that goal is maybe not inherently bad, but it's just ever changing, and I think that's what we struggle with. If it was just achieving that one goal and we could be satisfied with it, then maybe we wouldn't be so bad off. But the problem is we achieve that and we think, oh, I can do more, I can do better. And so we set a new goal. And sometimes, I think most time, probably we often do this without even realizing we're doing that. And so we're just never satisfied because we're just always chasing this goal that is forever ahead of us.
So is it just about a state of mind of finding happiness, or is it about, how does this relate to setting goals?
It relates to setting goals by you know, we have our goals set, but if we're always looking, they base, or sorry, they talk about goals as like the horizon. You know, if you're walking towards the horizon, you're never actually going to reach there because the horizon just keeps moving, right? And so when we're making these goals that we're getting to, if we're wanting to continue to progress and grow, we're not just going to achieve one goal and then stop. We're going to make another goal and another goal and another goal to keep us growing, to keep us moving forward. Kind of like the horizon's always out in the distance. But if you're only always looking to the distance and you're never seeing behind you to see how far you've walked, to see how far you've come, then your whole outlook on everything is you're always at the beginning and never progressing. But if you look backwards and you see everything that you've done and you've accomplished, working towards all these different goals that you've been setting, you're going to see this massive change that you've accomplished over the time of setting and trying to achieve those goals.
Okay, let me throw something at you, playing a little devil's advocate, because like if I wanted to lose 10 pounds and I set that as a goal, you know, I could achieve that. And yeah, I mean, I don't know as though everybody's going to be sitting there and say, oh, I lost my 10 pounds. I'm like, oh, I'm just not happy with that. I really wanted to lose 20 pounds. So explain, what do you mean? Because it feels like some goals are you're going to get there and it's easy to get there based on what your goals are. But then there's others that might be bigger. And is it a goal or is it more the ideal that we're talking about?
Yeah. It's the ideal. That's what he talks about, is that you have this, it's not really a set goal. It's this ideal that you've made up in your mind, and you constantly will augment that ideal. When you reach goals and you see how what you can do, that ideal will always be further than that. And it's just something that entrepreneurs, and who he's specifically talking to, we do that. I mean, I realized after reading this book, I did this with my business that I was growing it. I was never satisfied, even though I'd reached these goals that seemed outrageous at one point. It's like, okay, well, now what can we do? What we can do is always focusing on the future. And so there's goals, but the goal isn't what he's talking about. He's talking about you're always making that ideal and pushing it further and further and further away. And it's just where your focus is. It's teaching you to live in the now, man, and to be present where you are. Because if you're always looking to the future for fulfillment, your present is going to be empty. And you know, look back as a gauge to where you are now. They're really talking about get your attention here and now. Be attentive now. Be happy with
it. That's good. Go ahead. Oh, was somebody gonna jump in there?
Yeah, I had something. Just when you're talking, I remember they talked about astronauts and how, like, you know, when they started the moon missions, you know, a lot of those astronauts had done these amazing things in their career, learning how to, you know, airplanes were relatively new back in the 50s and, you know, or early 40s. And so that aerospace technology developed and they advanced in it. And then they get to the moon, which is like, you know, like, can we even imagine anything greater than that? And even after being there, there was this disappointment of like, well, now what? You know, like never being satisfied with these amazing accomplishments, when if you were to stop and live in that now and look back, you know, what's been accomplished in that, and you're a big part of that. You know, your history, you're making history.
Yeah, I feel that way with Boise
I feel like
State.
in our lives there's so much of that. Yeah, that we're just like you know, like what's next, instead of being like, look at what I've done now.
Yeah, totally. As sports fans, sometimes we get that locked in. You know, your team gets to that pinnacle of success, and every year after that, you're waiting for them to measure up to that ideal, and it's hard when they don't get there. You know, it can really suck. But that was it. Yeah, that's a really good point. So let's, you know, so we talk about the gap, and the gap itself is when we measure ourselves to the ideal. That's the cup is empty side of things. And what are some of the downfalls? What are some of the bad outcomes if we live in the gap? Why is that such a bad thing?
Never be enough. You'll never have enough if that's where you live. Nothing will ever be enough.
Do you think it's that black and white for people? Do you think people are, I imagine everybody does a little bit of living on both sides, even if they're not completely aware of the principle of the gap and the gain. And some people probably are maybe a little more pessimistic and are always looking to how they don't measure up. And some people are more optimistic. And so I imagine naturally we tend to fall into one side or the other. But do you think that this mindset and focusing on this will really make a drastic influence in your life, make a change?
But I say absolutely. I mean, it's since reading the book, I'm going through it for my second time right now, and always trying to implement. I catch myself in the gap like every single day, but I'm cognitive of that now. And so now that I'm aware that I'm falling into the gap, I'm able to adjust my thinking and mindset on whatever I'm in the gap about, whether it's my kids, whether it's money, whether it's work, whether it's my marriage, whatever. I'm able to sit back and think about, the gain side of it, because there's a gain to literally everything in life. You just sometimes have to think outside of the box a little bit to try to come up with what that gain is. Sometimes that can be difficult, but I know that when I'm in the gap and I'm not trying to pull myself out, and I don't pull myself out of the gap, it's literally like misery. I mean, it can get bad to where it's like depression and anxiety and anger and all these like really negative emotions, depending on what the circumstance is. That's so it super negatively impacts your life, on a mental level to where you start struggling with that kind of stuff.
I was laughing a little bit earlier because Finley came home the other day and she was telling me about how you started getting after Bradley for something, and then you stopped and caught yourself about being in the gap, and you had this conversation with him about it. And Finley's like, yeah, I know what the gap and the gain is. I mean, and we've had those conversations with her, but it's funny to see us because it puts it in the front, right? We're thinking about it. And I can't tell you how many times where I'll stop and think, and I'll think about, okay, how is it? I don't feel good about that. How am I in the gap? And I think about that ideal that I'm measuring myself to, and it causes me to kind of adjust my thinking and to try and find a better place to be in. But you started talking about, kind of the mental, emotional health side of this kind of thinking. And I've had a lot of family that's dealt with anxiety and depression, and can picture discussions with them and counselors and things like that. And this really does summarize well taking control of your thoughts and how you position yourself. Because depression, for example, it's like the little devil on your shoulder that's sitting there whispering that you're not enough, right? And telling you, and what is he doing? He's just completely gap thinking. He is just teaching you gap thinking and trying to keep you in that space. And that's depression. And so if you can learn to recognize that, to stop and to adjust what you're thinking to get into the gain, man, it really can be life-changing.
So how do you do that?
I was going to say, one thing that Dan Sullivan pointed out in the commentary on the audiobook is he said, even him, who's been teaching this for 30 years, he doesn't stay in the gain all the time. He goes into the gap, but it's that recognition you guys are talking about. It's like when he's sailing a ship, you never are right on point. You're always going back and forth, but as long as you're headed in the right direction, you recognize when you get into the gap and you jump back into the gain. Something that came to my mind when hearing those things, I thought of gratitude and greed. Those are kind of the two emotions or senses that go with each of those. So when you're in the gap, it's more of it's a selfish like greed, like I need more. And then when you're in the gain, it's like it's gratitude. You're grateful for who you are, what you've become, what you've attained to this point. And so that's another way to measure yourself. What am I feeling right now?
I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's really good. Chaz, were you about ready to ask how do you do that?
Well, yeah, like I'm thinking, and maybe JD answered that because I think gratitude is a phenomenal tool and gift. I just am thinking back to like the last 2 weeks for me, 3 weeks. My wife is on bed rest because of some surgery that she had, and she wasn't healing like she was supposed to. And so the doctor put her on bed rest, and it just, I don't know what it is. It just put me in this terrible mood of it's not so much that I'm angry about it. I just am not excited about life and having to pick up all the slack with the kids and with what's going on around the house. And I just been in this funk the last couple of weeks, and I don't know. And I know that I'm in a funk. I don't love being there, and I don't know how to get out of that. I don't know how do you, it can't just be a matter of willpower and willing myself out of thinking a certain way, or can it? But I mean, how do you really change your mentality from the gap to the gain?
Well, I think yeah, go ahead.
I'll say the first time I read the book, I started doing what do they say? They give you that formula at the end of the day, that last hour of the day. During that last hour, write down 3 wins you had for the day. Sometimes you may have to search, think, okay, what was a win? Like I got in a car accident, figure out how to make it a win, right? You write down 3 wins for the day, and then you write down 3 wins that you intend to have tomorrow. And you do that, that starts to shift your thinking. I've been doing that for the last week, and it's amazing. Those things are actually starting to happen that I wrote down. And it's like something happens in your subconscious while you're going to sleep that it gets you ready for that the next day. And going into that gratitude, like, oh man, I accomplished some things today. I'm grateful for that. It's going to bed with that gratitude mindset. And
it creates the vision for that win too, like the gratitude mindset. And it's just an extension of what you're saying completely, but your mind is ready to win at that point, and you wake up expecting nothing less. And when that happens, the wins start coming more and more.
And just to build on top of all of that, it's really a skill to learn too. Like it's not, you're just snap your fingers and now all of a sudden you can live in the gain all the time. I mean, like he was saying, like JD was saying earlier, Dan Sullivan, he still finds himself falling into the gap, and he's been teaching this for 30 plus years. And so it's like any skill that we're trying to develop. We're aware of the gap and the gain, and now you can start practicing implementing it, and just be patient and give yourself some time, give yourself some grace.
A lot of G words going around here. Yeah. Are any of you guys familiar with the work of Neville Goddard?
No.
Okay. Never
mind. You don't want to enlighten us?
It's a lot, but that's his thing. He talks about that state between awake and asleep is when your subconscious is the most susceptible to be influenced. So you use your imagination during that time, which same thing they're talking about. You write down what your wins will be for tomorrow, literally as you're starting to fall asleep, and magic happens. It's nothing short of that. It really does. And that's how you start to make those changes. It's one tool that they give you in the book to start to change your mindset if you're stuck in the gap most of the time.
That's when your mind's in a theta state, right? Isn't that what it's called?
I don't know the fancy brainwave terms. I just know it's when it's prime. That's all matters, right? I think in terms of steak. So it's prime and ready to grill.
So I wanted to kind of keep going, Chaz, with where you were at, what you were talking about, because the Bearded Mindset Project is really about that practical application and how we do it. And I think that we all have a little different variants of self-awareness. Like some people are very aware when they're slipping into a gap or a gain mindset. And for some people, they don't see themselves that way, or they can't catch that and feel that. And I'm just curious, amongst us, all of us guys here, can we all really quickly recognize that? Is it easy to recognize, or is it by the time it gets way down the road, then we realize what we've done all day long? I'm just curious how self-aware we are of that mindset and where we're at.
I know for me right now, it's like I'm able to pinpoint it pretty quickly, but it depends on how big my pride is at that moment, whether I do something about it or not. But I'm able to see it quick. But sometimes figuring out the gain is difficult.
Yeah.
Well, and that probably is a big piece of it though, right? Like once you start recognizing it, then you know that, and you know that that's not where you want to be. Maybe, especially with goal writing, things like that, you just naturally start to avoid it.
Mhm.
Sorry, Chaz, go ahead, buddy.
No, I was agreeing. I think finding that gain is the tricky thing. I think, you know, it's on my mind, yeah, but it's one thing to know something, and it's a totally different thing to implement it into my life and into the way that I operate. You know, I think of like my interactions with my children. I think, oh yeah, I got to have this gain mindset, you know, and then my children will do something that just completely ticks me off and feels disrespectful or just like nobody's paying any attention, and there I go from 0 to 100, you know. And it's like, I know I shouldn't, but like in that moment, it's so hard to stop myself and find that gain.
Yeah, I totally feel that. I know the one thing that has helped me more recently than anything, whenever that kind of stuff happens to me, is when I fall into the gap with my kids, especially my son Bradley. Yeah, he's probably the one that can push me there the easiest. I I I'm starting to be able to shift my mindset back into the gain by, you know, leaning more towards what JD was saying with gratitude that, you know, he's here, he's with me, he's still in my house with me, he's still hanging out with me, he's still my little buddy, he's still like running around being a kid, and turning, no, that being grateful that he's still here with me and not moved out of the house and not grown up. Like that's something recently for me has been a huge help and benefit for me, especially dealing with hard times with my kids when they're just being jerks or whatever, or they're leaving stuff out, making messes and things like that. I'm like, they're not going to be in my house forever. They're eventually going to move out, and I don't look forward to that day. So that's been helping me to quickly turn my mind back into the game and be like, I'm grateful that they're here to be able to even make this mess, because eventually they're going to be gone, and then the mess isn't going to be here to remind me that they're here and healthy and hanging out with me and stuff. So
Yeah, and I think an important concept in what you're saying that I have found with trying to implement any new way of thinking or behaving is that it has to be a deliberate thing. Like to stop and look for the gains, to express that gratitude. It can't just be, oh yeah, I'm grateful for him. I'm glad he's still in my house. I'm glad he's still here, and moving on. Like it has to almost be like a pause in a very cognitive, like, what am I? What is the gain here? What is in making a real effort to do that. And that's what actually starts to change. Like if I don't take the time to do that, then I steamroll it mentally and move on. And then I don't really change for the next time.
yeah, I mean, that's exactly how it is for me. Like I'm not just like, boom, done, it's over, and now I'm in the game. It's totally a cognitive thing that I have to like pause and readdress my thoughts and adjust my thinking, and then move forward with being in the game set.
Something that's really powerful with that though is that, and I loved this principle, and you don't get to this till later on in the book, but the ability to rewrite history. Your thoughts and your experiences are your own. And if you miss that opportunity where you don't catch yourself, you still have that reflection time at nighttime to look back on that. And maybe you look at it and it puts you in the gap, but then you start to think, man, I sure am grateful for that. And what did I learn from that? And how do I grow from that? Or next time, what can I do differently? And before you know it, you've completely turned that experience from a negative gap experience into a positive learning experience, so that the next time it hits you, you're not just doing the same thing. You're doing something new because you're pre-programmed to do that now. And so I think it takes a lot of those little tiny experiences to add up to that, being into that muscle memory pre-programmed state to start automatically going there. But But I think that's the benefit of this kind of thinking and that assessment, like JD was talking about, the 3 goals, but just looking back and measuring backwards all the time so that we can pull out positive experiences, learning experiences out of those negative ones.
So you mentioned something that struck my mind about that rewriting history, and I'll be honest, I haven't finished reading the book, and I'm trying not to be in the gap about that. But it strikes me because I don't know if this is what it means, but there's been many times that I have had to quite literally ask for a redo. If I'm going back and referring again to my children, or this has even happened with people at work, if I, fly off the handle at somebody because I make some assumptions and my assumptions are wrong, I have to go back and say, look, I'm sorry for the way that I treated you, and that's not the way that I want to treat people. Like, can I redo that? Can I tell you what I really want to say in this instance? And I never experienced that growing up from any adult in my life. And I'm only hopeful that, my kids are going to see that I am not a perfect person. I mean, that's obvious, but at least they can also see that I'm willing to come back and own my mistakes and try to make it right and admit to them that, like, I messed up and I reacted poorly and this is not who I want to be. And so I want to treat you the way that I believe you deserve to be treated. And I don't know if that's what they mean by rewrite history, but that's been something that I've been trying to implement over the last couple of years. And I think it's brought a lot of healing, honestly, into the lives of my own children and has helped me to be more accountable to my own actions rather than saying, feeling later, like you're saying, in bed and thinking, oh man, I really messed that up, and kind of feeling guilty and making resolutions to do better the next time, but actually going back and trying to make it right.
I think that's a better version of, anytime you have an opportunity to do that, I think what he refers to as times too distant past, because I'll tell you, there's lots of things that I look way back on that were 10 years ago that I really can't do anything about right now. And what's the self-talk around that event? What do you gain from it? And so many things can be, written in a positive or negative light, but I like that a lot. Guys, why don't we dive in a little bit? Because I think that there were key points like that, like the rewriting history, that were kind of scattered all throughout this book. And one of the very first ones, which I found very interesting, because it's language that we use in my relationship, trying to determine, okay, is that a need or a want? And he defined this in a way that was very different, way that I've never really thought of before, and teaching you to go after the wants instead of the needs. Who wants to take this one?
Well, can I start? Oh, go ahead, John.
John, go ahead, buddy.
I loved this section of the book. The first of all, let me look at it real quick, because I mean, it's so different from what I was taught growing up. Like in a religious background, you have, I guess it's just looked at like, asking for what you need and putting your wants, your worldly wants aside. That, like, worldly things are bad. Needs are necessities, and you can ask for those things. In the book, it talked about obsessive passions, which I felt like kind of tied in that, and it just it's so different to me. But like, it's almost like, it's okay to have these wants, and it's okay to pursue those, but not at the expense of staying in the present. That's kind of what I pulled from that. But like that whole section, just like, it hit me hard that, like, man, this is something I feel like I can apply in my own life to try to progress forward in my career. Just there's things that I've wanted in my life throughout my life that I have always felt like, oh, well, I can't have that because that's a worldly thing. And that's vain to want to have the nice things in my life, where really this is talking about, no, like, that's perfectly fine, but not at the expense of being present, and you know, don't lose sight of, you know, gratitude, you know, what you have now. Look at where I am. Because I mean, if I really, even if I'm comparing myself to my dad, for example, I'm way farther ahead financially and just in my life in general than my dad was when he was 40. So I'm progressing, and I can be grateful for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's a good way of measuring yourself backwards. But let's dive in a little bit more on the need versus the want. JD, like that principle to me still doesn't feel like it's fleshed out enough. Anybody else want to add on to that?
Can I say something? So he talks about in there how so many people, like we want things, but we feel like we have to justify to the world why it is we want this, or why we deserve it, I should say. Because like, you know, and then he mentions, you know, a lot of the rich folks, they have all this money, but then they have to go start a charity or something to prove to everybody else that, oh, they're doing good with their money, that, you know, you can't just want something to want it. And I found that was interesting. It's an interesting concept, because it's true. It's like, you're like, well, yeah, I want to build this big business so that I can help a lot of people. Right. And that's not a bad thing, but it seems like society wants you to add that extra in there. And if you don't, you come off as being selfish or self-centered or something like that. But he was just talking about sometimes just go for it because you want it. Just want it and be okay with wanting it because that's what you want. And that can be a difficult thing to do. It really can with the way that we're conditioned in society.
So, all right, so let me see if I can just rephrase this then. So if we're talking about the unhealthy need that they reference here, the need is established because of a comparison outside of ourselves. Is that how you guys is that how you define it? Is that why it's off? And the want is just something that you want by yourself, not looking at anybody else outside of you.
Well, and I think it's all these things, but it's turning something that you do want into like a need. So like I want $1 million in my bank account. I don't have that right now. But if I turn that want of $1 million in my bank account to a need, to where I feel like I need that to be happy, like right now, I'd be absolutely miserable because I am very far away from having $1 million in my bank. And so if I'm focusing on the lack of money in my bank account, that I'm saying I need this in my bank to be happy, to feel fulfilled or whatever, then I'm not, that's not going to make me happy.
That
but
puts
if
you in the game.
That puts me, thinking about it that way puts me in the gap. The game would be, I want $1 million in the bank. And so I'm going to look at where I started. And then it goes back to just the very basic principles of the gap in the gain. Look where I started of when I started that goal of getting $1 million in the bank and where I am now, and look at that progression rather than doing 1 million minus my bank account total and see bank account balance and seeing where I'm at, seeing how much more I have left to go. Focusing on that need for something that's not actually a need. That is detrimental.
But once again, it's all in comparison to that ideal, right?
It is.
So that's what you're saying is like you take it, and you do it. We do it to ourselves. It doesn't.
Having the need pulls you into that game,
or pulls you into that gap, right?
Gap. Yeah, having the need pulls you into the gap. Yeah,
I know. I did that all the time when I was trying to explain this to my wife. She was so confused. Mixing those up doesn't make any sense. But yeah, that's exactly right.
Well, I think maybe that's like again, our society. We think of these two principles, wants and needs, in a reverse way. That like, if I want it, then I must be in a gap. And if I need it, that means a gain. When it's really saying it's the other way around. And when you reverse that, you know, and focus on, again, I guess just come back to that present. Like if I have that want and I'm working towards it, but measuring myself backwards, then I'm in the gain. And it might actually make it more realistic and more possible for us to meet those goals and to achieve our desires.
And then that way you're enjoying the journey.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
perfect
And that's
example
the
of
whole
this
point.
was a perfect example of this is right in the beginning of the book too, with him talking about, I think the dude's name is Dan Jansen.
Yeah.
Yes.
Speed skater.
Yeah, the speed skater, Dan Jansen, about he
Mhm.
spent his whole career, went to the Olympics multiple times, never won gold until his last race when he was ready to go do his race. Then all of a sudden he shifted his mindset to how grateful he was with everything that he did and how many times he was able to go and compete at the Olympics and the performance he's been able to do. And his whole mind shift changed to where he looked at all of his progression. And so his confidence soared through the roof, which allowed him to perform at this insane level to where he went and broke a world record and won the gold for his last race. I mean, it's such an awesome story.
Well, because
I wasn't
for the
even a
first
strong
time
person.
in his career, he was 100% present in that race. He was not thinking about, I have to win, and projecting to the future and living in that gap in front of him. Even though it was a short gap, that was the first time he ever was 100% present as he raced.
Yeah. And JD, I think you get into a deeper thing that we'll probably get in next month's book with that thinking that you're talking about there. That section and I love it. That section right there really feels, and but that's a truth, JD. I think that's awesome. But that section, I think wasn't he talking about like external reference points and how to be self-determined? And I'm just thinking back on that right now, but talking about, I just remember the external reference points are the things that we grab onto and we try and shoot for, that we can never, we never find success and happiness because that external reference point is what we're gauging ourselves to, and for Dan Jansen, it was getting that gold medal, and everything was about that. He was, and the flip of that was like JD said, he was living in the now, but it also went to go on to describe his gratitude, because his mind shift was living in the now, but it was very present, but it was also the measuring backwards, where he was like so grateful for the things that he had accomplished in his career and all the work that he had done and all of those things. And it really, he created his own self-determined point of happiness. And he wasn't worried about that external reference anymore. He just did what he loved, and he ended up breaking a world record, which is amazing.
It's amazing what you can do when you put your whole heart and soul into something, isn't it?
Yeah.
Real quick, just going back to what you were talking about with the wanting. If you read between the lines there, it seems like Sullivan is saying a lot of people don't really know what they truly want. They're living by the expectations of what they think other people are wanting for them, or what they think they should want. He doesn't come out and say that, but if as I listen to that, that's the lesson I think he's trying to teach us there. Is you got to know what you want too, because you have to want it for yourself. Because if you live other people's lives, you're going to end up having a life that is not going to be fulfilling. It's going to be a lot easier to stay in the gap than the gain if you're living up to other people's expectations of you. My little tangent there.
That reminded me of the football player they talked about there, and how the world, professional football player that had amazing success, and when it came time for him to pursue a professional career, he'd made the point that, like, if something happened to me tomorrow where I could no longer play, I'd still be happy, because I don't need football to be happy. And the whole like media, everybody was like, well, this guy's got it all wrong. If he can't be 100% obsessed to the point where like football means everything and anything, and if there's no football, then there's no life, then he'll never be successful in a professional career. And he ended up having to like clarify, it's like, no, like I love football, and I'll give 100% to football as long as I can, because I do want to have a wonderful career in that. But the point is that if something happened where I could not have it, that's not going to destroy my life. I still have a happy life with what I have. I've had an enjoyable experience to this point. I think I just have seen that in my whole life. Like, it's like, well, if I don't get to this certain goal, like, am I going to be happy? when it's like you just completely forget about like the experiences you've had, even working towards that. And
it's this
what
Trevor
those,
Lawrence
how
he's
those,
talking about. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. One thing I thought was really cool. I don't know if you guys remember this, but when he won the one of the playoff games as a Jaguar, Trevor Lawrence, the media made fun of him because that next morning he was at a Waffle House eating breakfast. You guys remember that?
No.
Because he's from Florida, you know, and the Waffle House is on every corner. If you've ever been to Florida, but because it's like a poor man's place to eat, and the media was making fun of the fact that Trevor Lawrence was sitting there at Waffle House eating breakfast after winning this big playoff game. I think it was last year. So
Waffle House is one of the best restaurants in the world. Just saying.
You trying to get the sponsorship going already?
I love Waffle House. I could seriously eat there every day.
Yeah, and that just alludes to his personality, like John was saying. You know, he doesn't care what anybody thinks. That's what he loves, right? And so he just went and did it. He wasn't trying to live up to some standard that people had set for him, which goes right back to what Sullivan's talking about. You got to learn to live what you want, live the life you want to live, and that's how you're gonna spend more time in the game.
So just thinking back more on some of the deeper dives on the book, chapter 3, the compound effects of the gap in the gain. And do you guys, and Chaz, maybe this is something like what you were talking about, as you start to live in either of those, it quickly, you start to feel it. It quickly compounds, and it feels like it sucks you in more and more. When you have gap thinking, it feeds on itself. When you're being around people that are in the gain, and you start to you start to communicate the way that they do, you start to think that way, and it's contagious. It starts to build itself. But have you guys noticed that how one mindset or the other, it really can pull you in that direction? Like some days you wake up and you're just in one spot and it's easy to go that way, and another day you go the other direction. Have you felt that?
Yeah,
I have, absolutely.
I think one of the, they talk a little bit about it at the end of the book. I don't remember talking about it too much towards the middle, but I've also have seen, a lot of stuff about when you first wake up really sets like the mood of your day. Like if you wake up, you turn over, and I am very, very guilty of doing this, but rolling over, grabbing my phone and jumping on Instagram. Like if that's the first thing that I do in the morning, I am setting myself up to not really have a very productive day.
You're gonna have a gap day.
Yeah. I'm more likely to have that gap day. But if I wake up, roll out of bed, drink some water, do a little bit of exercise, meditation, read some self-help, self-improvement book stuff, and do some of these things to quickly better my life right at the beginning of my day, then that's just setting up your whole day to be in a completely different mindset and completely different mood and put you on this trajectory to just have a better day.
Yeah, and I think that same section was what JD started talking about initially with the 3 daily wins, and just recording that too. Like it goes hand in hand. Like the night before, if you can take that moment to ponder on the day, and then setting your wins for the next day, plan 3 wins. When you wake up, you're ready to just roll right into that. Because if you don't have a plan, then that's what you do, isn't it? You just roll over and you do what you want to do, which, your body or, your mental state might be like, oh, let's check out Instagram, while I just lay here in bed. But if you have those wins that you're going to go attack and you're ready to do it, it's like, okay, let's wake up, let's get going, let's do it. And it helps you get into that role.
Social media is super gap. It's like that. It is a gap. That's all it is. And so it's difficult to spend much time on there without falling into the gap, because it's all about comparisons. So yeah, it's just an observation.
Well, that's probably the compound effect right there. They are really weighing. They're strategically, recognizing the compound effect of the gap and know that it's addictive to stay in that spot and keep comparing and go down that hole even further.
Is it in this book where he says, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it mentions that. Yeah. So in social media, the product is your shift of mindset or something like that, right? Like your perception, your shift. They're trying to subtly shift your perception and your wants and desires, and that is the product.
I can attest to that. I decided to get off of all social media a couple years ago, and along with that, any sort of like news feeds and what, and you could call me uninformed and whatever you want to. I used to get into political debate quite a bit, and I realized one day it's like this is just robbing me of a lot of my peace in life, a lot of my happiness. Like I'm having arguments with people that I hardly know, and they're not changing their minds. I'm not changing my mind, and all I'm doing is just getting pissed off. And so I decided, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to try stop following the news and the politics and the negativity that's in the news, and I'm going to get off social media. And I have never looked back, honestly. Like it has done more for me to get into the game. I mean, I didn't know it at the time, but now I can frame of reference that put me so much more in the game than just about anything I've ever done, really. Social media is it like you said, it's a huge,
it's Satan. No, it's hard because I feel that all the time. And Chaz, I try and set those goals too, but being a ADHD web developer,
yeah, that's the thing. It's not for everybody. And there's a lot of good that social media is being used for, but
well, it's the political stuff that gets you going. I mean, I get sucked right back into it, and I'm like, no, it makes me miserable. I mean, there's sometimes on my watch I'll see my stress just go bing, and I've got to like turn it off, and I have to take 10 minutes and do the breathing exercises, and to try and get back into it. It takes a lot from you. It's
for
stupid.
What?
I know, it's so stupid, but yet I still do it again. I don't learn my lesson.
First thing is to recognize, right?
Right.
Oh, I recognize all my faults very easily. Anyway. All right, guys. So I think we've hit this book up pretty good. Is there anything else that stands out that we want to dive into?
I just had one more thing that's been, I think throughout our conversation, we talked about, learning to recognize, and I felt like in the book they talked about how, tools that we can use to recognize. I think we talked a little bit about them, but the one I kept coming back to was the soccer team. They had the female soccer team back in, I think it was the early 80s, that college level, nobody had really played. So they put together a team with unexperienced people, and the first half of the season they just got whooped every single week. And the coach would have them, like, he timed it, like, you get 5 minutes to feel depressed about this, but during that 5 minutes we're gonna try to find a couple positives. What did we gain from that? And then the next 20, maybe I got that wrong, but like the next 20 minutes was designated to some more thought. But after, I think it was about 40 minutes, it was just like, we're done. We're not talking about that or even looking back on it ever again. We're going to look forward to practice this week, and we're going to, and that process, it took, about half the season for it to really take effect. And then they ended up winning the second half of their season. And then one of those players, had forgot, but she started a business, and down the road, kind of got caught up in the gap. And, somehow something was said where it reminded her of that practice of, pausing long enough to give yourself time to feel bad about it, and then taking a moment to kind of find some positives and some gains, and then move forward. And as soon as she started doing that, her business and the team that she was working with had leaps and bounds of success. just by having that simple practice put into place. And so I kind of just felt like, one of the things that maybe we ought to start discussing as we review this book is how do we implement these things? What exercises do we take? Because they're not going to be automatic. You have to consciously stop and think. But the 3 wins, that's an exercise that helps you make the change and then apply it in your life. And what else can we do to keep ourselves in the game, or put ourselves back in the game, because none of us can stay in the game 100% all the time.
Yeah. Well, that's good. And that maybe brings us to a good point of how do we take these things and apply it in our lives. And so, maybe just go around and just like after our conversation, what do you guys want to continue doing or focus on this next week? And then maybe next week we can talk a little bit about it, what you guys have done, what you found success with, if it made a difference for you. And so, Christian, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, well, I want to focus on doing the 3 wins at night, and what the 3 wins I'm going to be shooting for the next day. My mornings are absolutely terrible, and so I need to focus on get something to direct my attention to trying to do something different in the morning rather than just rolling over and grabbing my phone first thing. So I'm going to be focusing on doing the 3 journaling, the 3 wins for the day every day at nighttime right before bed, and what I'm going to win the next day.
Yeah, good. JD, how about you?
I'm definitely going to keep doing the 3 wins. And sometimes I cheat too. If I know I have something planned and I know I'm going to do it anyway, I'll put it on there as a win, because then I already have like the pump primed. So, and I did nothing wrong with that. It's my thing. I can do whatever I want. And Sullivan talks like that a lot in the book too. When they're doing discussions, like it's my memories. I can do with them what I want. So, another thing, I live in my head a lot. Like I'm always thinking, analyzing. So I've already found myself, since listening to this book 3 or 4 times, that like every situation I find myself in, I'm like, oh, I'm in a gap, and so I'll pull myself out. But that just requires constant vigilance. But I'm okay with that. That's what I do. It's just the way I live right now. So I'm just gonna keep doing that. And one thing, Christian, that I've done, I got an accountability partner when I was down in Texas with meeting some other business owners, and as I put this goal in place, I want to meditate every morning first thing, at least 20 minutes of like a guided meditation. And so I got an accountability partner to text me, or I have to text him when I've done it every day. And so today I just texted him day 12, but I have to have a consequence to don't do it. And so if I don't do it, I can't eat the next day, and I like eating. So I'm not going to miss that. So sometimes having an accountability partner can definitely help, and say, hey, that you just check in with once a day, and then put a consequence in place that you won't like, and that's a good motivation. So, we just lose John.
Looks like it.
Yeah, we just lost John.
We did.
Okay. He was getting scared. He didn't want to have to report in. Tell us what he was going to do. Chaz, why don't you take us from there?
I think for me, self-monitoring has become a pretty important part of my day. And I can speak more to that later, but I think for me, I just want to add this to that process of, checking in with myself throughout the day. Am I in the gap, or am I in the gain on whatever it is I'm dealing with? I think they spoke about how you can only be one or the other. You can't be in the gap and in the gain on any particular situation. And I think sometimes it's a little ambiguous. I think sometimes it's a little hard to tell where we are, if we are in the gap or in the gain in certain situations. And so I think just by taking the time to really think about it and monitor it, and then proactively try to remedy any of those gaps that I'm in, as we're talking about, finding the positive in all these things. I think that's so critical, and just something I want to try to implement as I go about my week.
Yeah, cool. John, do you want to tell us what we thought you bombed out because you're scared to share with us what you want to do for the week? But what are you thinking, man? What do you want to do this week?
I wish I had recognized that opportunity when it was in front of me. No, I think, I mean, for me, I kind of just going on with what Chaz had mentioned, that like I have a hard time recognizing it, that like I'm either one way or the other. So I think, you know, that's the first step is learning to identify, oh, this is a gap or a gain thought process. But then I want to try to dive a little deeper with what that coach was teaching, you know, like how's a physical exercise. I don't know if you say it's physical, but a mental exercise of, you know, I'm going to stop and I'm going to give myself 5 minutes to fill that loss. And then maybe spend 20 minutes trying to recognize the gains. And then once I've, you know, kind of worked that process, you know, I want to try to leap forward and just move on and not allow myself to go back into a gap mentality in that particular situation or memory. But yeah, I think for me anyway, it would be step one is learning to recognize how easily I slip into a gap or gain. So,
yeah, that's awesome. You know, I was thinking of another story in the book that we didn't really touch on. I don't even remember what it was related to specifically, but he was talking about the British rowing team and how they created a filter that they would just push, and anything they did, they just asked, does this help us? Does this help us get faster? Does this help us row faster? And so guys going to a party the night before, does this help me row faster? Nope. Check out. Done. You know, and so for me, I've had, you know, there's some things that I put on my list of things that I want to focus on, that I just asked, does this experience, you know, does this achieve my goals? And so that right away helps me to assess. And usually my reaction to things, whether it's gap or gain, I find that it's very present for me because I'm in my head a lot too. And so being able to ask myself, because maybe I have a reaction, I can assess where am I at, and then I quickly try and turn it around. But then once again, the 3 rules and the assessment at nighttime, just looking back on the day and taking a moment to try and capture some of those moments so I can learn from them. So that's kind of what I'm after. So, all right, guys. So this is, we call this a project because we are the project. We all have different places in our lives. We're not all on the same exact level and where we feel successful at. Some of us are, you know, are way up there and others might not be. At least that's how we feel inside, but that's what we're working towards. And so this whole podcast and this whole project is to show everybody, to join with everybody else and seeing how it works out for us. And so we would love to hear any feedback or comments that you guys might have. So please post those below in the comment section, and just think about that. Are you in the gap or the gain? Any concluding thoughts, guys, or is that it for us?
That's it.
All right, guys.
To be
Well, it was
continued.
fun. And we will meet next week and talk about it again. So see you later. We're out.